Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on enhanced teaching with AI and Mentimeter. There were a couple of people commenting in the live stream chat that they could not hear us yet, but we hope that you can hear us now, and we're super happy to have you here with us today. So if you have registered for enhanced teaching with AI and Mentimeter, then you are in the right place. And we have so many feelings and thoughts about AI already. There's quite a lot of positive comments here. People are seeing it as a powerful, helpful tool that assists them in their work. But there are also some worries and some comments that we need to understand it more before we can leverage it to the fullest. But I warmly welcome you all to today's webinar. So we're going to be doing a little bit of introduction on both sides, actually. We're three people here with our cameras on, and then there's all of you here with us in the webinar room. Then we're going to be having a little bit of a look at generative AI and what is it and how can we frame the topic of today's discussion. Then we're going to be hearing about implications of AI on teaching and learning. So kind of having both of the student and professor lecturer perspectives. So that's going to be really interesting to see. Then we're going to dive into how you can leverage Mentimeter, some tips and tricks from Mentimeter's side, some tips and tricks from some power users that we have with us on the call today. And we're also going to be looking at, Mentimeter and AI. How do the two work together? How is this interacting? We'll also be doing a Q&A session. We will see how much time exactly we have left for that, but the Q&A is being moderated simply so that we can keep on track with the questions and the topics for today, and so that there are not any duplicates in the questions. All right, I would like to start with some introductions, and we have a wonderful guest speaker here with us today, Lillian Blott, who is a senior lecturer at University of York. Lillian, I would love for you to say a few words and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm a lecturer at the University of York, and mainly I'm teaching a first-year student programming. And therefore, AI is quite important in your process, but that's something we are looking at now for changing the way we are teaching. And that's something I address within my teaching and producing my material as well. I've been used to pilot several digital tools for the university, and actually, right now, I'm testing a new tool integrated into our VLE using AI for creating assessment and so on. So it's becoming present almost everywhere now in our work.
Awesome. Super happy to have you with us here, Lillian. And our other guest is actually from Mentimeter, and I'd like for Jacob to say a few words about himself as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. So happy to see so many people joining today, as this is my favorite subject, AI. I work as an AI engineer at Mentimeter and work with how we apply that type of technology in our core product. And we're going to look at some use cases today as well. Speaking to Lillian in a preparation meeting, I realized how much I miss university and first-year programming. That was a great time in my life, I remember. But trying not to get too sentimental here. But yeah. That's it from me.
All right, thank you both. And quickly, I am Astra. I am the marketing manager here at Mentimeter. I will be moderating and kind of semi-hosting today. And funnily enough, I have 3 generations of educators in my family, all on my mother's side. So in our family, the question is, when is Astra going to become a lecturer? We will see. We will see how it goes today, and if maybe that is a career path that I need to explore in the future. And we would like to get to know you a little bit as well and really see who we have here with us today. So if you could scan, a lot of you have been saying hi and where you're joining from in the live stream chat, but I'd love for you to join this Menti. So if you can scan the QR code and let us know which university you are joining from. I'm going to also submit the university that I went to here in Sweden. Wow, look at that. It's going to be a pretty crazy word cloud. We have 50, 60, 70 people submitting answers, and we have around 390 people in the webinar today. So how big can this word cloud get? It's looking beautiful, folks. Wow, this is amazing. And it really makes me happy to see images and word clouds like this and have a webinar like this to really showcase that Mentimeter is used everywhere, and we're all interested in AI and in enhancing our teaching, and that is why we are here today. Awesome. Super, super nice to see this. I can't even read it all, but University of Ljubljana is one of the big ones, so go you guys. And University of York, Lillian, I think we have some of your colleagues supporting you here. Awesome. All right, so before we get started, this webinar is recorded. The Q&A is moderated. You will get the recording and also the slides after we wrap up the webinar. And we will be sharing more resources with you so that you can take your teaching to the next step and your use of AI. But without further ado, let's go. And I would like to hand it over to Jacob to give us an introduction on generative AI.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Astra. So giving similar talks a year ago, I think the general knowledge on the topic of generative AI was a lot lower, but nowadays it's kind of embedded in a lot of our day-to-day tooling. And I'm sure many of you have used generative AI through ChatGPT or similar tooling. So I wanted to start with just asking a question on how that usage looks. Do you use generative AI on a daily basis in any format? All right, looks like we have a very even split here between the groups, which is very interesting. Perfect. Okay, but then maybe some of this introduction is new to some of you. And for others, we'll get into the educational part or educational perspectives on AI, which I think are very interesting. But in general, how we look at generative AI at Mentimeter is that it's a subset of artificial intelligence that focuses on creating new content. And new content can be, generating text, but also labeling things and understanding user input. And we're going to look at some examples of that. And of course, this is all based on machine learning. And as an engineer, it was kind of, you were not allowed to use the term AI in your professional setting. It was too diffuse, but I think everyone's just given up by now. It's called AI, and that's how we call it at Mentimeter as well. Next slide, please, Astra. Okay, so why is this becoming such a big thing for the last 5 years? Well, there have been major improvements in hardware, which is needed to operationalize these models. It's also so that foundational models are available through APIs. So if you roll back time 10 years ago, every company had to have a very capable team internally to be able to serve these type of models, even much simpler ones than we have today. But nowadays, there are providers who makes this accessible for everyone. There's also a great open source movement around this. So tech-wise and coding-wise, Lillian's, there's a lot of good dependencies out there that you can trust when building these type of systems, which is nice. And also the data sets used to train have grown exponentially the past few years, making these models a lot more powerful in their knowledge base that they are trained on. And specifically, I know you have LLMs in your slides as well, Lilian. At Mentimeter, we're focusing a lot on large language models, and that's because if we think of a Mentimeter presentation, the way you collect responses is through text often. We're super interested in understanding how we can leverage this technology to make sure that you easier can understand the responses that you get, understand sentiment, draw conclusions, and take decisions on next best actions. And some examples here, I think we have 4 main kind of capabilities that we're exploring and that we're also building features around. So we have creativity, being able to generate things, which we're going to demo later. Efficiency, making sure that you feel efficient and capable within our tooling and not getting stuck in UI challenges and things like that. You should be able to easily instruct Mentimeter on what you want to do to save time and to save your valuable time, basically. Personalization as well is important. Maybe you want to tailor existing content to a new type of class. Maybe you're used to running a class towards highly skilled students, but you have students who are taking their introduction course to a certain topic, and then you can tweak it to match their kind of knowledge level. And then exploration is important to us as well. We want to be able to allow you to easier find things in Mentimeter that maybe you're not aware of. So that's how we're kind of focusing our efforts. Yeah, a simple example of creation is converting a blog article into something short and shareable, for example. And we also have an example on the next slide of personalization. I use ChatGPT a lot in this way. I tell GPT I'm a 5-year-old, and I give it a complex concept, and I get a good response I understand back. So great way to personalize content. Yeah, so that's a quick framing, and we're going to dig into what this means for the educational sector. But do you have any favorite use cases among the audience that you would like to share? All right, a lot of interesting examples here.
It looks to be quite heavily on creation with ChatGPT, for example.
Good, then we might have a demo down that alley later on.
Amazing. Well, let's see. I think now that we've had a little bit of a framing and we're hopefully on a more equal plane of what generative AI is, I welcome Lillian up to the stage to tell us about his experience and his work with AI and how that helps him in his teaching. So yeah, away to you.
Thank you. I can have the next slide, please. So we keep asking you a lot of questions, but here what I would like to know is, compared to what we had at the beginning of 2023, was no, we don't want to use AI or generative AI for our student. What is the current position you have with generative AI and the use for your student on that matter? So it's quite interesting to see how it evolves over time, and I'm going to share some results a bit later on. But I can see that here you want to use generative AI to understand some concepts, so helping the student for them to be able to understand it. One thing you are using, which surprised me a lot, is for assessment, as long as they provide a citation site where they use generative AI to create their model answer. So it's quite interesting to see that the number of people saying no is much less than what happened a year ago, where there was a big discussion about what's going to happen to education, especially higher education, on the way we assess, and we should ban completely generative AI. And I think there is a shift in the mentality of many people. So thank you very much for that. And in the next slide, I'm going to show what has been gathered as a study of 371 US students doing a computer course. So they are not computer science major, but they are using a course on computer science. And because that's my interest, that's what I'm teaching, I wanted to know exactly what other people want to look at. And I've been finding this study from Codio, which is quite interesting. Quite a few people, 20%, say that their lecturer teaches them about how it works, because it's very important to understand generative AI, to understand what kind of result you are going to get. Also, they teach them how to use effectively generative AI or ChatGPT, for example, to make it a bit simpler. So that's something very interesting. And again, only few of them are going to ban completely the use of generative AI. And only 4% of professors, apparently, for the computer science courses, say no, you cannot choose them. My point of view is we should support them, but there is some caveat into that. And personally, as a user, I will feel a bit hypocritical to say to my student, yeah, I'm using it, but you cannot. You have to work hard to do that yourself. So we need to find another way to look at generative AI. Can I have the next slide, please? So one thing I've done using Mentimeter, which is a brilliant tool, is the first lecture I had with my student about programming, I asked them a question. So I had a statement in Python, and I wanted to know what will be the output of that statement. And I used a quiz for that. And I can see that here, 75% of the people say there will be an error, and they are correct, actually. So 75% know the answer. There is 10% saying infinity, which is kind of similar, okay? And that's not a stupid answer, but that's something that could happen because mathematically we can say it's infinity. So we understand that it's the right answer in some way, but mostly the right answer is it is an error. Can I have the next slide, please? Then what I've done is show them several prompts I've used for explaining why it is an error. I didn't give them the answer yet that it was an error, but I tell them I'm not sure why so many people have said it's an error. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT why it is an error. And that's the first answer I've got. Then ask them again, can I have the next slide? To answer again the same question. After that explanation from ChatGPT, what is your impression about that statement? And you can see there is a big shift from an error, which is a correct answer, where we were 75%, to only 16%. And most of them did follow ChatGPT and moved to the infinity, which was the solution proposed by ChatGPT. So here we'll have to be very careful about the quality control of using ChatGPT as an interlocutor for a student to understand some concept. So it's very important to set that from the beginning. So that's something that they find very, very useful. Be careful, use it, but be careful. And for my course, because it's an introductory course, they need to understand the concept. And therefore, they are not allowed to use them for creating code because they need to understand what the generative AI is going to produce and to be able to assess if what has been done is or produced is correct. So therefore, I like ChatGPT, or similar things, but they are not allowed to use it in the assessment because it's a beginner course and they need to understand the core concept of programming. Future courses in second or third year, probably something they will be able to do eventually because the concept is not programming itself, is something else that they are going to learn. Can I have the next one? Thank you, Astra. So what I would like to know is how do you use LLM if you use it and for what when you are doing for your lecturing? And I've seen that at the beginning, quite a few people say work smarter, and I think that's the idea behind it, and that's the way I use it, to work smarter, to be more efficient. So quite a few people for the moment are saying never, and I hope that after today's webinar, you will start to use ChatGPT to help in your work if you are preparing some course content. So we can see that some people are using that for writing lecture, but quite the majority almost is to provide additional material or probably some links because it's quite useful as well to be able to discover scholarships work in that matter as well. So I think there is a large split between writing seminars on practical and writing additional material, which is quite interesting. I hope that out of the 68 people who say never, quite a few are going to change their mind very soon. Can I have the next slide, please? So how is it used when you look at the literature? And I've seen some studies which were quite interesting. They use, for example, in a language course, the ChatGPT as an interlocutor. So in fact, because they were teaching a language, they were not programming language, but a natural language. What they use ChatGPT is to have a kind of a type of conversation where a student learning a new language try to interact with the ChatGPT to be able to understand, to have a kind of a communication, which is very interactive compared to listening to a tape and repeating the content of the tape. So they use that ChatGPT to be able to have a kind of discussion. So in the same way, it is used as a teaching assistant because you don't need to have the teacher next to the student to have that conversation. But behind that, they need to be careful because we still got the issue of quality control. Okay, what kind of feedback they're going to receive from or answers they're going to receive from ChatGPT. Another thing that is very interesting is papers to develop MCQ assessment for mathematics. And what they want to do is not just to create a multiple choice questionnaire where I've got a series of questions on the right answer. What they want to provide is something a bit more clever, where you're going to provide specific feedback for a wrong answer. I need to make sure that the wrong answer is quite realist, so it can highlight some common misconception. And so far, we are not there yet. If you look at the paper, we looked at it, we are not there yet. So there is still some work to do to make it very efficient for producing work very efficiently for us, and to have some work which is pedagogically very sound. Can I have the next slide, please? So how do I use it? I like to work smarter. I don't like to work too hard. So what I try to use it is to make my life a bit easier when I produce content. And this year we had to change a bit our modules because we went to terms to semesterization. Instead of having 3 terms, we've got only 2 semesters during the year. So we have to make some changes to the course. And ChatGPT or equivalent come at the right time to do that. And I use it as a colleague to be able to rebuild and revise my module. So it was supporting my documentation as well. What else can I do? So I use it as a simple question. I want to teach that. How can I do it? What should be the structure of my course? And obviously, I'm not going to take exactly what they say and put it directly back into my course, but that gives me alternative ideas that I may not have thought of. So in fact, I'm talking or I'm bouncing idea to another colleague, which is the network of many data that has been provided for that kind of courses. So it's very useful as well. I use it to write script for my YouTube video. I use as well for my pre-recorded lectures I provide in my courses. So I use that a lot because it helped me to produce content, to get new ideas. So it's very creative. And in addition, you may have noticed I've got a very strong French accent. I've got a way of formulating English, which is not always very easy for students. So I can use it to rephrase a little bit the way I express myself, to make it a little bit easier for students to understand. So that's very useful in that part as well. But because scholarship is very important when you are a TNS lecturer, it's very interesting for me when I want to explore something new to use ChatGPT to explore a new scholarship and understand an area I never used to look at before, and to be able to find the proper literature. I tried that last year when ChatGPT was out, and there was a lot of fiction and references that did not exist, but it's getting better. And I've tried it just before that seminar to see if I had better answers. And here you had directly the link to the journal paper, which was very interesting when you try to explore something new. So I really recommend to use ChatGPT or equivalent in that. For that matter, I use Copilot now because it's very precise for references and it helps me produce work very quickly. Can I have the next slide, please? On the next.
Great. Yeah, so just a little pause before we dive into leveraging Mentimeter, but I really hope that those 68 people that had not used generative AI to support their teaching are feeling inspired by what Lillian just shared, then we'll kind of take a couple of his suggestions and apply them for the future. But yes, next slide and diving into Mentimeter, I guess.
So I've been dreaming of Mentimeter a long time because I wanted to change the way of teaching. But for my specific module, which is for large cohort, I've got 250 students, I couldn't have any tools at the University of York to do that until 3 years ago when they use Mentimeter, when we get a license for Mentimeter. And from then, I've been able to use it a lot, okay, because I don't want to go back. But the way I build my coursework, my module now, is very dependent on Mentimeter because I use blended learning. So I'm going to have pre-recorded video lecture, and I've got 2 hours of software lab session where people are going to practice what they've seen in the video lectures. And at the end of the week, I've got a 1 hour review lecture to look at what we've done this week, what are the misconceptions, and that's where I'm going to use Mentimeter a lot, and that's in person. And that's something which is very important. It's kind of a flipped classroom approach to my teaching. So the review lecture is when I'm going to recover everything we've seen this week and what are the challenges I've seen amongst my students during that week. Can I have the next slide, please? So how do I build my review lecture? So I've got a core content I want to teach, and that's not going to cover the entire hours of my lecture. It's going to be normally most of it, but not all of it. Why do I need that kind of flexibility here? It's because it depends on the question I'm going to get from my student on the quizzes. So the quiz are going to try to guide my core content. So I've got a questionnaire. They are going to reply that questionnaire, and within the response, I know the common misconceptions I'm going to provide, and I'm going to be able to explore why it is a misconception and why you should move towards the correct answer. So that's part of the core content. But sometimes if students find it very easy, then I will have too much time on my side. So I've got optional content that I'm going to explore a bit further. So it's a bit deeper concept that I'm going to explore here. But in that case, I need to be aware that this part may be discarded in my lecture because I will have spent too much time on the question. So the two most important parts in my lecture are the type of question I'm going to receive from my student. So it can take a large part of my time, and the quizzes that I'm going to structure the content of my lecture. And these quizzes can be done from the feedback I got from my GTAs, my teaching assistant, during the software labs, or from what I know from my students from a long time. I know this concept, I'm going to have that kind of errors. So I can explore that using quizzes, and the students find it very interesting. Can I have the next slide, please? So when I've done that, what is important as well is I'm going to be able to keep track of all the questions I receive, because I can have that from Mentimeter after the presentation. And then I can publish a Q&A table for students to be able to look at it later on. So that's a very useful tool from Mentimeter, because all the questions I had during the lecture, I didn't have time to write down. Therefore, I will be able to access them directly with the Mentimeter presentation. Can I have the next slide, please? So the main question is it working? What does my student think about that kind of lectures? And you can see that everything which is highlighted with pale blue is something related to my Mentimeter as a very useful method for teaching. And my students love it. They want that more, in fact. So that's something which is apparently very useful. But is it because it's interactive but they are not learning much? So let's see what we can have next. Can I have the next slide, please? So I want to evaluate what kind of feedback I've got. And I'm going to use a free text for that. And I can see that most of it is the Mentimeter, the live lecture, which is based on Mentimeter, the lecture review, which are also based on the Mentimeter. So all that is linked to Mentimeter. That 1 hour review lecture, especially for my students, which are a bit weaker. All the other part, like the textbook and the pre-recorded video and the live lecture, have been made using generative AI. So it supports my producing my content. Can I have the next slide, please? So, okay, I've got my student doing taking part in my lectures, but do they interact? Is it something where they participate? Are they active during my lecture or not? And in this slide, I can see that when I'm taking into account only the people who register to the Mentimeter presentation, I've got always around 80 to 90% of students who are going to log in and also interact. But how does it compare to the overall cohort? And here you can see that it's always above 60%. There is 2 data points where the data is a bit weird, which is the data point of week 9 and 10, because my students were able to create a bot to be able to log into Mentimeter and answer the question for them. So suddenly I had, instead of having 230 students, I had about 5,000 students in my classroom, which is not realistic in any way. So what is important here, I've got a lot of students participating. A minimum of 60% of students are going to be interacting within my lecture. But most of the time, it's going to be around 70 to 80%, which is very beneficial compared to what I used to have before. Can I have the next slide as well? But this slide is the most important for me, because when I used to do the traditional lecture, where I was delivering content, and sometimes I was asking, do you have any question? I was lucky if I could get 2 of them. But this time you can see the number. Especially at the beginning, I've got about almost 50 questions on my first lecture. It's because here they are new to university. They've got a lot of questions about how a module is going to be run. So we can see that in light green, you've got a lot of questions about what will be the exam, what is the module, how it's going to work, and so on. But further along the timeline, you can see there is more and more question about the content taught within that lecture or within the seminars or the practical session. And you can see that here I've got most of the time 10 questions, something I never had before. And here the question is about the content, only the content, what I'm teaching right now, the things they don't know yet, the things they want to explore a bit further. So that's very important for me because here we can hear the people I usually don't hear. The one which are a bit weaker and don't want to look stupid during a lecture, and the one who are a little bit more introvert and don't want to interact in public. They've got a voice now, and that probably is the most important part in my teaching on using Mentimeter in my literature and in my lectures. Can I have the next slide, please? So we didn't have time. I didn't have time this year to look at the AI tools provided by Mentimeter because it went out, I think, in January or something like that, and I finished teaching my module at that time. But I had other colleague in my university who've been looking at it after the lecture took place. So they didn't use it live because similarly, they were not able, it wasn't available at that time. And overall, what they think is it's very useful, that grouping, because they've got, when you've got a question, an open-ended question, and you've got, like we had today, and we've got about 70, 80 different question answers, it's very difficult as a lecturer to be able to see through all of this. And therefore, what we're going to do is pick one or the other one. The grouping is going to be very helpful. However, they mentioned that is not always very accurate. So they need to change a few things as well. The grouping is not as accurate as they wish, and dependent on the type of question. So if it's quite general, the grouping will be quite relevant. If it's very specific to one specific area of, for example, biology, then it will be a bit more difficult for the grouping to work perfectly. So, but overall, they say they will be using it live next year, which is very important. And if the grouping is not correct, it doesn't matter that much because it will be the seed of a new discussion for during the lecture. That's it for me. I know it's time for Jacob to explain a bit more, and I've tried to explain a bit more about Mentimeter. But I'm a fervent adopter of Mentimeter because it does help a lot in the teaching.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lillian. I hope that this was very inspirational for everyone here in the webinar, seeing some real-life examples of how a lecturer uses Mentimeter. We've also prepared a couple of examples of how you can leverage Mentimeter from our own side, tips on Mentimeter from Mentimeter. And you will be getting all of these slides after the webinar. So I'm not going to spend too much time on each of the examples, but I'm going to show them more as a little bit of a sneak peek of what you can do. And so we're going to go through 4 main areas, where the first one is capturing students' attention. Now, I haven't been an educator myself, but from my family, I've heard that this is not always the easiest thing. So there are multiple different ways how you can do that and how you can capture their attention in really clever ways to get them to connect to the topic that you are talking about, not just by submitting a yes or no or just looking at the screen, but actually being involved with what they are learning about. So for example, you can ask them where a certain bone is located in a foot. And you are also able to use this as a moment of teaching and actually show them where the bone is by showing the correct area here in the image. Similarly, if you would be a professor in commercial law, I guess would be the subject here, you could have just a temperature check in the room. If you would have been a judge, how would you have voted? And then you can use these insights to drive the discussion forward and to present your teaching materials about the topic. By the way, if anyone hasn't seen this documentary, it's really interesting. So highly recommend. Then we can also look at a couple of examples of how you can gauge understanding with various formative assessments. And I think I have a couple of examples here. So for example, if you are covering the research methodology or how a thesis should be written, you can ask which part your students find the most challenging to write. And in an interactive way, they can show you what they struggle with the most. And then you can take that and adapt your next lecture, for example, and see what you should put most focus on. We have another similar example here. What would you like to see more of in your learning experience? And there's sometimes some beauty in giving, predetermined options and having your students rank them so they don't have to, write it out themselves. But there is equally as much value in having an open-ended question and getting these ideas from them in the language and in the format that they prefer to express themselves. Big fans of group discussions here in this webinar today. Let's see. We also have a section on how you can create a dialogue and understand knowledge levels. And here I'm going to, I believe, show a feature that people always love to see. Not that many people of them know it, but it's going to be interesting to see how many of you have used this before. So what is your first language? Here we're doing a general check-in with the people that we have here in the room. We have, very interestingly, English and then other, and very few in the middle. These are some slides we have used before, so these were the options that we had here. And you can ask a second question of how many languages do you speak? So you're getting some insights into your group on 2 questions with kind of aggregated answers. But sometimes it's really interesting to dig into the data in the live moment a little bit more and understand your audience, your students, more in the moment. So if you go here to the left-hand side, you see this little panel, and you can click on Show Segmentation, and then you can segment these answers that you see here based on what they answered in the previous question. So very interestingly, if your first language is English, you are quite likely that you speak only one language. Whereas if you speak any of the other languages, you are more likely to know more languages. So you can see very interesting insights in this way. So you're getting a little bit deeper into who your audience is. You have to be a little bit smart with how you combine the different questions. So there is quite a lot of art in what questions you ask, but this is always a really interesting one that both of our business and education users like. And I'm seeing quite positive feedback to this in the Livestorm chat as well, so glad that you like it. All right, and then you can also create a dialogue based on open-ended feedback that you get. So we are not done with the session yet. I know that having this question here might make it seem like we are getting close to the end. But if I would get some answers here, you don't have to, spend too much time on it just now. I want to show you how you can also use one of Mentimeter's AI features here. So if we would get more than, oh, okay, there we go. So having quite a lot of these boxes, it's really hard to get an overview. And Lillian was mentioning this before. We have a feature in Mentimeter that is powered by AI that allows you to group all of these responses so that you can have a better overview of what the group has submitted. I think this was one of the first AI features that we released. Jacob can confirm or not confirm that later. But basically, it allows you to, it allows you to get some of these groups. So we see quite a lot of love for segmentation, quite a lot of informative opinions, and so on. So yeah, this is also a way that you can start a dialogue and, for example, either highlight the group that has received the most answers or a couple of them, and so on. And then lastly, we have something that is, I think, gathering feedback to improve as an educator is, it's honestly a very vulnerable thing because you are, out there in front of sometimes hundreds of people, hundreds of students, and you're asking for feedback. And doing that can be rather vulnerable. But you can, for example, do something that you can collect feedback in the live moment, because feedback is best when it is fresh. That's when people's feelings are the most like recent. But if you would not want to see this or let it be shown in the moment when you are in the lecture, you can also hide the results. So that will hide everything, and then after you are done with the lecture, you can actually unhide it and then go through the results in your own time. You can also use it to see not only the average, but also the spread. Sometimes the spread of the answers is way more interesting than the actual average of them. Let's see. And you can also, of course, always encourage questions with the Q&A function. We will be doing a Q&A in the end as well. We have, I think, 4 questions right now. If you have any more, please feel free to submit them. But that is it for the little bit of inspiration. You will be getting these examples to your inbox after we wrap up the webinar. So please feel free to copy the slides to your own account and then use any of the examples that we shared as like a starting ground. Maybe you want to do a course evaluation, or you want to collect some open-ended feedback. So yeah, I hope that it will be useful to you. But now it's over to Jacob to tell us a little bit more about Mentimeter and AI.
All right, great. I'm trying to keep up in the chat. There's so many good questions here about our AI features. All right, so Mentimeter at AI. I think Astra showed some great use cases of how you can kind of go deeper in your data without AI. So I would say Mentimeter already as a product has a lot of good features built in for you to do analysis, like the segmentation that we saw. But what we're aiming at now is, this is from our internal strategy documents sharing widely here, but we have a product principle that states that we want to use AI to augment human interaction. So we very much believe in the human interaction that happens through our tool, and we want to keep it that way. So the way we're viewing AI is as a complementary tech to make it easier for you to understand the responses that you're getting in and draw insights, and also make it easier for you to use the tool. And if we go to the next slide, Astra. Yeah, so basically helping you to ask the right questions, gain valuable insights from the responses that you gathered, help you determine the best next steps, and also allow you to use our product to its fullest potential. And I can see in the chat that we do get a lot of questions on specific features and how do I make this visualization happen and things like that. And that's one of the releases that we are doing next week, and we're going to test it now live for one of the first times here to help you kind of create Menti from a prompt instead of going through the editor. So I'm going to showcase that right now. And we already have the grouping feature out. It's been out for a while to help you kind of sort through responses in the live moment. But the feature that we're now going to look at is something that helps you create and prepare your Menti before a lesson or a lecture.
All right, I'll stop sharing my screen and then hopefully you can share yours too.
Let's see. All right, so now you're seeing my screen. I'm in the home view of Mentimeter, and there is a new button here with a beta labeled called, or it says Start with AI. So we're going to try and press that one. And let's say you are late to your lesson, just had a back-to-back lesson, and it's time to go again. And you want to ask a icebreaker question to your students to get them going. Going to the editor might feel a bit stressful, but you can go through here and you can write that you want a word cloud asking my students about how they feel about last week's lesson. We press submit. And then we have a theme picker, so you can pick a quick design. Different colors. We're going to go with the default one. And we're going to generate our draft. And as we know from experience with generative AI, sometimes you have to tweak content to get it exactly how you want it. But this is giving you a good starting point in the editor to just do the final fixes. We press start editing, and we've selected an image for you. We've set a question which we believe might help you, which might work in your setting, and we picked the right slide for you, and then you can go from here. So basically a simpler way to get started with creation. And Astra, do I have time for one more use case?
Yes. Yes, we will be running over time a little bit, but I hope that everyone is okay with that.
Nice. So since we have Lillian with us as well, I don't know if you do use Mentimeter as a quiz you mentioned before. Let's say you're going into your first lesson with new students, and you want to create a quiz about Python programming for first year students. Submit. And with generative AI, you have to have some patience. It takes some time to do the calculations. Once we have that, we can pick our theme. Let's go blue this time. And we're generating your draft for you. And I know everyone's joining here is subject matter expert in your kind of field. So of course, be very critical to the content you get. And as I've said before, you're getting a starting point. But you basically have a template that you can start editing and filling out. And here we got a introduction slide, and then we got a set of questions on the topic of Python. Lillian, do you teach Python?
Yes, I do. So I'm looking at that very carefully.
Yeah, good. I think it makes sense. So what keyword is used to define a function in Python? Is it def?
That's correct.
That's right. And then you go down and you get a leaderboard. So you get a full setup that you can tweak to your usage and use in your lesson. And this is now out to all users. So please try it out. Also, we might request feedback on your end through a little CSAT tracker. So please use that to give us information on how we can improve the feature as well. That's
Great.
it. Astra.
Yes. Can you stop sharing? Or maybe I can just override your sharing. Let's see here. There we go. So it was time for the demo, and we got the demo, and there were a lot of questions in the chat about when is this going to be available. So as far as I've understood, everyone who is not an enterprise customer has access to this already, and our enterprise customers will have access to this on Monday, May 27th. Is that correct, Jacob?
That is correct. That is correct. And it's set up to be an opt-in feature, so it's not automatically enabled for everyone. It also depends on how your Mentimeter administrator has set up your account. But it is there for anyone to, or for any enterprise to enable opt-in.
Great. So if you're not seeing it, it might be the thing that your IT department has not enabled this feature for your specific workspace. But if you're loving what you're seeing, then feel free to send them a friendly message on Microsoft Teams or whatever else communication software you use in your universities, and nudge them that this is something that you would like to try out. And we hope that it works out and that it really, makes it easier for you all to create these interactive moments for your lectures and for your students. I think we are almost done with everything now, so it is time for a little bit of Q&A. I think we're going to take about 3 questions to not run too much over time. And the first question is, what tools can be used to detect AI-generated essays and projects? Maybe Lillian, you have something that you have used or something where people could find resources regarding this.
So we tried different things, but for programming part, it was we didn't have anything integrated with our system, so we couldn't use it directly. And it was very difficult because the type of assessment I had was very constrained. So it was very possible for people to have a very similar answer to that problem. However, I did find some very odd answers, and when I tried to do the same thing using ChatGPT, I have something very similar. But it was too late to be able to do anything about that because the marks were already released at that point. So we don't have a proper tool to do that for coding yet. But one thing we need to consider is, do we want to try to catch people using AI to generate essay, or do we need to change the way we assess to make sure that even if they use generative AI, what they learn from it will be useful? So we may have to think the way we assess from now on. I'm not trying to change the way we teach and keeping the same way of assessing and try to catch people cheating or try to be cleverer than the AI because it's a losing battle. So I'm not looking into that. I just keep doing my assessment on if I can find something, I will track it, but that's not my main preoccupation anymore.
All right, thank you. Let's see, is there training available for the use of AI and Menti for these various functions? Very happy that you asked this question and that you're interested in this. So the best thing to do is I'm going to send a link in the Livestorm chat where you can find more webinars, and specifically the monthly product deep dive webinar with our product expert, Oscar. This is a more open webinar where you can basically be in charge of the agenda. So you can submit whatever topic you would like Oscar to go through, and he will be, demoing all of the features and functions in a more in-depth way. So feel free to check out the link that I just sent. I am aware of its uses, but can you give examples of the prompts you use to create things, please? Many thanks. I think that this was asked on one of your slides, Lillian, so perhaps any suggestions on how you would prompt?
So, for example, when I wanted to create my course, the entire module, to try to have some more inspiration, the first thing I say is, how can I structure 11 weeks modules to teach programming in Python for beginners? And then from that, I'm going to have a set of chapters, for example, or different theme. And then I can go to one theme and say, can you expand a bit more? Or could you divide that? Why do you choose that? So I use different prompts. I'm not going to create one prompt to have everything. I'm going to create a general prompt, and then I'm going to get a bit more precise in my prompt on a given subject. And you can have a long conversation. That's why I say I use it as a colleague to be able to bounce ideas, because it's a long discussion. You will not have a prompt that gives you exactly what you want. You need to work on it. So it's not a given, but you can have some return, because you will see something different to what you expect, or something it will change your teaching or the content. So it's very important to have that kind of discussion with AI. But most importantly, you can disagree with what they give you and say, no, that's not, I don't agree with that. So I don't want that, but can you give me something else instead?
Oops, I muted myself there. All right, thank you, Lillian. I think that we don't want to keep you here for too long after we have already run a little bit over time. So that's going to be it for the questions. If you have any questions about like features or specific use cases of Mentimeter, feel free to hunt down our guests here today online and send your questions to them. If you have any questions about Mentimeter features or any like technical support, we have a wonderful support team that would be very happy to answer them. So as we wrap up, a couple of things. This webinar was indeed recorded, and you will get the recording and all of these beautiful slides afterwards, just when we hit end. We will be sharing more resources with you in the coming weeks, so you'll get some further inspiration and some advice. And if you have any questions, then hello@mentimeter.com is the best way to reach our wonderful support team. And thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for our guest speakers as well for taking the time out of their days to join us here today. As we are wrapping up and as you guys are popping to your next lectures or maybe picking up the kids after work, if you have a minute to let us know what you thought about today's webinar, that would be most appreciated. But yeah, thank you so much from my side, and I guess from the guys as well. I will leave this up here for a couple of minutes, but thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.